Welcome to my first media availability of 2021. And again, as always, feel free to ask me anything. I have a couple things that I'd like to say up front. I imagine that's probably what you'll want to talk about, but if you want to go on to other things, I'm happy to discuss those as well. So first of all, of course, today is an extraordinarily sad day for all of us in Calgary. And like many Calgarians, I had the opportunity to participate as a silent observer in the procession today for Sergeant Andrew Harnett. It's so hard. You know, I had the chance to talk to some of his colleagues, and I heard some stories about extraordinary police work, and I heard some stories about crazy hijinks. I just wish I had known him. And he devoted his career to looking after District 5, my neighborhood where I live. And even on such an extraordinarily sad day, I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for his service, and I'm grateful for the service of all of the women and men in the Calgary Police Service and our other uniformed services who put their lives on the line for our safety every single day. I'm grateful for the firefighters who were there. I'm grateful for EMS who were there. And I'm really grateful for Sergeant Harnett's colleagues. And I know I speak on behalf of the entire community when I say to the family and to the colleagues, understand in this incredibly hard time that you are surrounded by a circle of love, that you are surrounded by everyone in this community who is there with you and who is there for you. You might not see all of us, but we are all there next to you, and we are all doing so out of immense gratitude for Sergeant Harnett's sacrifice. Today I also want to tell you about something that I've been grappling a little bit with. And the reason I've been grappling with it is because I believe that public servants deserve not to be treated like politicians. That as politicians we have signed up for a certain life. We've given up any element of privacy, and we are held to a certain standard. But I also believe, as I always have, in utmost transparency. And I know that there is a lot of public interest in a lot of what's been going on over the last week or so. So as a result, today I am here to tell you that two members of my staff, including my chief of staff and an administrative assistant in my office, traveled over the Christmas break. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how that came to be. And I want to highlight one thing, which is nobody asked me to do this. People haven't really been asking around. It would really have been quite possible that no one ever would have known. And for me, that protecting people's privacy is actually very important, and I hate having to expose folks who did not sign up for a public-facing role in a public-facing life in this way. But at the same time, I also believe in this transparency. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how all this came about. At the end of November, the government of Alberta announced, in conjunction with Canada's Airlines, a special program for Albertans to visit Hawaii. At that time, Minister Schweitzer, Doug Schweitzer, the Minister of Jobs and Economy, said that this would be a safe and responsible way to travel. And James Rajat, who is the Alberta government's senior representative in the United States, said that Alberta to Hawaii was a safe travel corridor. And I know Hawaii has a lot of implications on it at the moment, but it is also the only place that I'm aware of where the government of Alberta made this announcement. And so these members of my staff, independently of each other, looked at that announcement and looked at their own plans and discussed it with their families and made the decision that they thought was both right for their families, but also acceptable in terms of the messaging they were getting from the government of Alberta. So yes, I was aware of this travel because I care about the people that work with me and I care about where they are. But I also believe that they made a decision that they thought was right and fair and within the rules. I had a lot going on in these weeks before December, and I really wish that I had pushed back hard on this. I really wish I had said, are you sure about that? Do you think that that is congruent, even though it's within the rules? Do you think it's congruent with the messaging about how we're all in this together, with the latest numbers? I really wish I had done that. I didn't do that. And I'm really sorry that I didn't do that. And I deeply regret that I didn't do that. But ultimately, I also believe that these folks didn't do something they thought was wrong. They didn't actually jump out and say, I hate these rules and I'm not going to abide by them. They followed what they thought the rules were. And they're not politicians. And so ultimately, I have decided that I will not take any further action on this. I'm sorry that I didn't act more as a boss and as a friend, that I didn't do more than that, but ultimately that is where I think the fairest outcome should be. So with that, I will open it to questions, please.
Sir, can you specify again, sir, which members of your staff and where did they go and when?
My chief of staff and one of the administrative assistants, they both went to Hawaii. I believe they both went to Maui, and roughly over the Christmas break. I don't have the exact dates.
So they returned, what, prior to the end of the year?
One just prior to, one just after.
Okay, and that's two independent trips?
Yeah, it's completely independent trips.
Can you elaborate on your thoughts now, given everything else that has transpired, why you do not think they should be sanctioned?
You know, I bet you that every single political advisor who's watching this is yelling at me saying, fire them! That's how you save your skin. They did what they thought was right. And I am not a person who is going to ruin someone's reputation and ruin someone's livelihood and mess up their family to save my skin. I'm just not.
So as a result of this and everything that has occurred in the past 5 days or so, is there going to be anything different now going forward as long as things are as they are today?
Yeah, I think very much so. You know, I appreciate, which I say sort of in a sardonic way, I appreciate that the Premier has clarified his instructions around travel. Here at the City of Calgary, you know, we have had a number of instructions around business travel, but we also believe as an employer that we can't tell people what to do in their personal lives, but there are a number of guidelines that, on their personal time, I should say, there are a number of guidelines in place about how we manage that with things like insurance and the advice that we give people. And so my advice now is very strongly, don't do it. Stay within Alberta, certainly stay within Calgary if you can, and let's get through this pandemic. Let's get through this second wave as best we can.
What about city councillors? You know, the majority have been forthright about what they were doing, and even a couple that did travel out of province. One has not commented. I guess, what are your thoughts on city councillors?
I actually do believe that politicians should hold themselves to a higher standard. I don't always succeed, but I try to hold myself to an extremely high standard on this stuff. And ultimately, you know, I don't have a caucus, they don't work for me, but those folks will have to make their own decisions. And I do think there is a difference here. You know, there's a difference between someone going to a funeral, you know, going to their dad's funeral, or someone who does an overnight on a ski trip near Calgary versus someone who travels internationally. You know, maybe people will say, I understand people are very angry about this. And people might say, Mayor, you're making a fine distinction here. But ultimately, throughout all of this, for all these months, one of the messages that I've really tried to bring forth to people is be kind. You know, don't be kind to people who are flagrantly breaking the rules, who are flagrantly putting other people at risk. But be kind to people who are making decisions for their lives, for their kids, for their families, whether you're going to online school or school in person. Listen to people. And ultimately, I think that's an important part of our response to all of this as well.
Your chief of staff is your top advisor and should be able to see you through political minefield, we'll call it. Does this decision change your opinion of her?
I think it's important, and again, I hate drawing fine lines, but I think I have to. I think it's important to note that although her title is Chief of Staff, the same as the Premier's Chief of Staff or so on, it's actually a very different job. So she's actually a career public servant. She's been 17 years at the City of Calgary, and I borrowed her from the City of Calgary to help run my office. And yes, she's very skilled, and she deals with very specific and very delicate files, but she doesn't actually manage my political agenda in the way that the Premier's Chief of Staff does. And so that's not an expectation I put on someone who is a career public servant. There are others who help me with that. Because her job is to keep the place running and to manage really complex files.
So can you help members of the public understand that distinction, notwithstanding what you just said in terms of they have the same title, but they have very different jobs. People driving by this building would say, Kenny's Chief of Staff went to the UK and he's no longer there. Your Chief of Staff left the country, but she will be. Can you help us?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So I think there's two answers. Number one is, even though the titles are the same, the jobs are completely different. And the Premier did not let everybody go of the various staff members who had traveled. But number two is, and I don't want to pile on, I hate that, but I got to tell you, going to a place where the government said was a safe travel corridor, and going to a place that's in lockdown and currently under a travel ban, look, those are not the same thing.
So are you saying that this is an issue with the government's openness about saying that you can go to Hawaii and kind of facilitating this for people? Should that not have been done?
Ultimately, the provincial government made its decisions, but I have tried since the beginning, even though we don't make the decisions. That's the other big difference that I should have mentioned, Scott, right? Which is, remember that the Premier's office is directly in charge of making these decisions, of highlighting these restrictions. My Chief of Staff has nothing to do with that, nothing to do with the state of emergency or anything like that. It's a different world. But one of the things that I have really tried to do in my last 10 months, 304 days as a matter of fact, since all this began here in Calgary. But in those last 300 days, what I've really tried to do is provide clarity to people and saying this is what you can do and this is when you cannot do. And to be quite honest with you, I was confused about what the travel requirements were. I wasn't thinking of traveling, but I was confused about that because I was focused on providing clarity for the at-home requirements. And I think that, even when you go to the government's website, it says at the very top, the Canada-US border is closed, and then underneath goes on and on and on about how you cross the border, and the pilot projects they have in place to make crossing the border easier. So, listen, there are many, many, many citizens who traveled, and it's hard for me to blame them, particularly those who went to Hawaii on a government program. Or at least a government-supported program. Minister Schweitzer and Mr. Rajat were in the press release on that program. It's hard for me to fault them when it wasn't perhaps as clear as it could have been. If the Premier's intent had been, at the beginning of December, to ban travel when we had other restrictions put in place, I wish he had said it.
You've been known to make a trip yourself to Hawaii.
Yes.
You did not go to Hawaii this year at Christmas. What was your reasoning?
Oh, there just weren't any good deals. No, I'm kidding.
I think there were some.
Actually, I think there were excellent deals. No, I don't always go, though I will tell you that I did get an amazing deal for my birthday in February just before COVID, and had a long weekend. But ultimately, listen, one of the things I told my staff, and I stand by that, is I said, over this break when our office is closed, try to relax, try to get a bit of time off, because I'm here, because I'm holding down the fort, and I'll call you if I need you, but I'm here. And that is what I think. I'm here. We're in a crisis, and that's what people expect of me, and I'm here.